Okay, welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. My name is Matthew Stem. I'm the Deputy Secretary for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And today's webinar is going to address the important topic of participation rate as reflected in Pennsylvania's ESSA plan. This presentation will be a high-level overview for our district and charter school leaders to ensure awareness of the change in this area and its impact. This webinar is going to be archived for you to share with your teams. It will be posted on PDE's YouTube site. And also, additional webinars will be scheduled in the upcoming weeks to provide greater detail that you can share with your assessment coordinators, PIMS administrators, and others involved in managing your test administration. From a process standpoint, we're going to handle the Q&A a little differently than we sometimes do. And so if you look on your screen, you'll see the email address btruesdale@pa.gov. And throughout the presentation, if any questions come to mind, you can go ahead and send those questions to that email address. And following the presentation, I will take 5 or 10 minutes to respond to as many of those questions as I can. And questions that we don't answer on the webinar will still receive a response. Also, the questions that you send will help inform the content of our upcoming webinars. So please, don't hesitate to send questions our way as they arise, again, throughout and following this presentation. To provide background and context, the Every Student Succeeds Act reauthorizes the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, first passed in 1965, and it replaces the No Child Left Behind Act, which became law in 2002. ESSA continues the goal of promoting equal educational opportunity for traditionally underserved children. So at its core, ESSA is a piece of civil rights legislation. ESSA also provides the rules for the state's use of federal education funds, and each state's plan provides the blueprint for how the state is going to use those funds to advance equity and transparency. And in Pennsylvania, we receive approximately a little bit less than $750 million in federal funding each year. So speaking in our plan and providing the blueprint for the use of those funds is one of the important functions of the submission of the plan. So as we begin to talk about the process for submission and approval of our state plan, I want to thank all of you that were a part of developing our consolidated plan. As we circulated throughout the state over the past year and a half, we've spent time with teachers, students, parents, community members, business and industry, elected officials, higher education partners, and others. And for us, the submission of our consolidated plan isn't just about fulfilling a federal requirement, but it's really about setting the vision for education in the years to come here in Pennsylvania and capturing the vision of our stakeholders. And we believe that with all of your participation in your communities, that we have a plan that reflects the shared values of all of our communities here in the Commonwealth. And so we submitted our original consolidated plan on September 18th of last year. We posted that submission on our website in English and Spanish along with additional resources. And 34 other states also submitted in that September window. On December 21st of last year, we received interim feedback from USDE on our plan, and then we submitted a revised plan on January 8th with revisions that were responsive to the feedback we received from USDE. And our plan was officially approved on January 16th of 2018. So as we move forward, we're now moving out of the planning phases and very much into the implementation phases of this good work. There have been a number of early ESSA wins for our students, and we want to highlight a few of those here before we transition. And the first is the 20% reduction in testing time on our PSSAs that are beginning this spring. And not only reducing the testing time by 20% in terms of the overall number of minutes, but also in eliminating 2 sections at every grade level in grades 3 through 8. And we know for many students, if not most, that's going to mean 2 less days of testing in their schools. Also, beginning in 2019, we were able to push our testing window back by 2 weeks or more, and that's 2 additional weeks that we're going to be able to allow for instruction to take place prior to the assessments. We've also, in 2019, been able to shrink the testing window so that the majority of schools will be able to complete their math, science, and English language arts in 2 weeks, instead of having 3 weeks to the disruption of operation of schools. And so we're very excited about that as an early win. We're also excited about the way that we've been able to incorporate the use of growth in identifying schools in need of improvement. In the past, when we identified our 5% of schools in need of more rigorous interventions and support from the state, we only used achievement data, and we're now looking at growth as a way to ensure that we're identifying the schools that are most in need of comprehensive support and improvement, as well as targeted support and improvement. We've expanded the use of valid non-academic measures of school success, and when we take a look at our career readiness indicator, we've identified career readiness as an accountability indicator that really focuses on preparing students with all of the skills that they need to succeed beyond high school. And our elementary students are now focusing on career awareness, with our middle level students focusing on preparation and planning, and our high school students on implementation. And we're the only state in the nation to have a career readiness measure that goes all the way down to the elementary level. You know, we've heard loud and clear, especially from our business and industry partners, that our students need the experiences that are going to position them well in the working environment, including communication, collaboration skills, critical thinking, and other skills that are sometimes difficult to measure on standardized tests. So we're excited about the career readiness indicator, and want to especially thank our IU partners who over the past several months have been holding a number of trainings for districts on how to collect evidence on that indicator. We're also elevating chronic absenteeism as an accountability indicator, and this is one that's going to ensure that we're meeting the holistic needs of students and is going to be sensitive to the school environment, including school safety, student engagement, and the types of supports that schools are putting in place to ensure that every child is in school and learning each day. And finally, looking at our Future Ready PA Index that's going to be launching this fall. And this is going to be the dashboard format to change the way that we report school success. And as we move away from a single summative score, which we believe makes claims that can't be statistically defended, we're going to be providing a dashboard with much more information in an easy to understand format for our parents, guardians, and other community members to position them to have robust conversations at their school and district levels to really improve outcomes for all students moving forward. So as we transition to the specific conversation around participation rate, I want to provide some insight on the background and rationale for the change in this calculation. So first, federal statute is explicit regarding the calculation and reporting of assessment participation rates. Pennsylvania's initial and revised state plan back in September sought to achieve a balance between the federal requirement for 95% participation as well as the existing state-level religious exemption provisions that we have in Pennsylvania under Chapter 4. So in that first submission, for those of you that looked at our September 18th submission, you'll note that we had not volunteered a change or a significant change to the manner in which we calculate achievement. USDE reviewed our September submission and determined that that submission did not meet the requirements of federal law and required us to change our achievement calculation related to assessment participation rates. So in short, USDE was upholding the federal statute that requires Pennsylvania in its accountability system to address schools with participation rates that are below 95%. And it's important to note that to the best of our knowledge to date, every state has been held to that same standard of 95% participation, and in the same way that that Pennsylvania is being held accountable. For some additional context, we'll take a look at the participation rates statewide in Pennsylvania, and you'll notice that for our Keystone exams as well as for our PSSA exams, we have participation rates in excess of 95% in all 6 of our assessments. And for the overwhelming majority of schools that are reflected in this data, the change should not be an issue. So for any schools that have historically had and continue to have 95% or higher participation on their PSSA and Keystone exams, nothing that we've submitted here in these calculation changes will have any impact. So it's only going to be schools that have had or have moving forward participation rates less than 95% that will see any change. Let's take a look at how we've historically calculated achievement rate before we look at the changes moving forward. So in 2016-17 and prior years, our numerator in the calculation has consisted of the number of students who've achieved proficient or advanced on the statewide assessment. And in the denominator, what we've measured that against are the number of test takers among enrolled students who are full academic year. So in simple terms, students that don't take the test or non-testers historically have never been included in our calculations. Your achievement rate has simply been the number of proficient or advanced students divided by the number of full academic year students that took the test. So here's the change. Beginning this year and in future years, the numerator will continue to be the number of students who achieve proficient or advanced on the statewide assessment. But the denominator now looks different. And this is a little bit wordy and does come directly from our plan. But we're looking at either 95% of students enrolled in the school on the last day of the respective testing window who are full academic year, or the number of test takers among students enrolled in the school on the last day of the respective testing window who are full academic year, whichever is higher. So what this is saying is once you go below 95% participation, each additional student that's a non-tester now becomes, in effect, non-proficient. Non-testers, after that first 5%, are now in the denominator, and that denominator is never going to go below, are now in the numerator, and the denominator will never go below 95% of your full academic year students. So before we run a couple of scenarios, let's just take a look at how we define full academic year. And you saw this in the calculation, but we're going to break it out here. So in order to be full academic year at the school level, we're talking about students that are enrolled on or before October 1st and continuously enrolled in the school until and including the last day of the applicable test window. So if a student is enrolled in the school before October 1 and they are still enrolled all the way through the entire testing window, those are students that count in the calculations. If a student moves in after October 1st, they're not part of that calculation that you just saw, or if they leave before the testing window or in the middle of the testing window and are no longer enrolled, they would not count as full academic year. There's only a slight difference at the LEA or the district level, and that is we're now saying enrolled in the LEA on or before October 1st and continuously enrolled in the LEA until and including the last day of the applicable testing window. So in other words, if you're in a district that has multiple schools at a given grade level, let's say you have multiple middle schools, a student is enrolled in the district before October 1st, leaves one middle school, enrolls in another middle school in the same district, that child, assuming that it's after October 1st, would not be attributed to either school, but would be attributed at the LEA or district level. So let's run a couple of scenarios. And this first scenario will demonstrate what it would look like where there's no impact to an achievement score based on this change. So we'll look at a 5th grade English Language Arts PSSA in a sample elementary school that has 150 full academic year students, as we just defined, and then 5 recently arrived English learners, since this is an ELA exam. So what that leaves us with is 145 eligible test takers. If we subtract out those that don't test, we're going to then have our participation rate. So let's, for this scenario where there's no impact, assume we have 6 students who do not test. That means we have 139 test takers, or a participation rate of 95.9%. And let's assume that 99 score proficient or advanced. We calculate the minimum USDE required participation rate, 95% of test takers, which in this case would be, the threshold is 138 students. Now we apply the greater of those two numbers, and in this case, the 139 test takers exceeds the 138 threshold. So we divide our proficient or advanced, those 99, divided by 139, and have a proficiency rate of 71.2%. So if we compare that to the way we've done this in the past, in our prior calculations, we were simply looking at the total number of test takers, and in this case, the total number of test takers, 139, wouldn't have changed one year versus the next, and so in this year's calculation, the proficiency rate would be identical to what it would have been in years prior. And as I said before, for the overwhelming majority of schools in Pennsylvania, there's not going to be a change to what you see in your achievement calculations, because you have participation rates that are over 95%. Now, let's use the same sample school, and we'll run a scenario where there is an impact based on the new calculation. So if we, in this case, have 12 students who don't take the test, that gives us 133 test takers out of 145 eligible test takers, or a participation rate of 91.7%. Let's assume that we still have 99 students that score proficient or advanced. We calculate the minimum required participation, which doesn't change. That threshold is still 138 students. If we compare the 133 versus 138, we'll see that in this case, we're going to be applying the denominator of 138. And in this school, no matter how many students don't take the test, the denominator is never going to go below 138. That becomes the threshold. So 99 proficient advanced out of 138 gives us a 71.7% proficiency rate. So here's where you see the impact of that. If we were running this calculation the way that we always have in 16, 17, and prior, the proficiency rate in this school would have been 74.4%, because we would have only been including those students that actually took the test. But under the new formula, because we have that threshold of 138, that's a 95%, we essentially have 5 students that were just added to the calculation as non-proficient. So 5 out of those 12 students that didn't test are now non-proficient, and that's the difference of, almost 3% percentage points in the old calculation versus the new. So you can see how important it is that we do everything we can to position our schools to hit that 95% participation rate. I do want to make clear that we're not making any changes to how we calculate participation rate. So the participation rate doesn't change. It's how we're calculating the achievement based on that participation rate that we were required to change. So participation rate is impacted by a number of factors, and you see those 6 factors on your screen. We have parental requests under Chapter 4, which we refer to as religious opt-out. And then we have parental requests that aren't under Chapter 4, which we refer to as refusals. And we're going to explain each of those or talk about each of those in the next couple of slides. But then we have these other 4 areas that impact our participation rate, and particularly no attempt, no exclusion marked, and no record have a significant impact on participation, as well as then extended absent and absent without makeup. As a side note here, English learners in the first year in the United States will not impact participation rate in English language arts. And that's why we demonstrated that in the last example. That's not a change. But before we leave this slide, what I want to highlight here, and this is where we really have an opportunity and a message that we want to drive home here, is that if you combine students that fall under the categories of no attempt, no exclusion, as well as no record, those 2 groups together, if we look at our 16-17 data, there are actually a greater number of those students than there are students who have either opted out for religious reasons or refusals. So this is an area where we want to pay particular attention, and this is an area where we have an opportunity to improve participation rates in many of our schools. There's a lot of content that you're going to see on these next several slides, and that is intentional because it is our hope that you can use these slides as needed as a reference when working with your teachers and administrators and teams. So these are reminders about parental requests and parental rights under Chapter 4. I'm not going to read every line of these bullets, but in short, this first section is a reminder that districts and schools need to be sure that there are policies in place to communicate whatever the process is in your district or school for parental review and for the Chapter 4 allowances. The second bullet is a reminder for schools to have procedures in place that to review and maintain, to review the assessments, and those processes have to be sure to ensure test security. So again, first bullet, make sure you have a process to communicate to parents, and second bullet, make sure that you have a process for reviewing assessments that ensures security. And then the last bullet is a reminder that upon receipt of a written request from a parent or guardian objecting to the assessment after reviewing and based on religious reasons, that districts have a responsibility to uphold that parental right. So here's some additional detail, and what I want to lift up here is that, as parental rights are being afforded to them, the specific religious conflict does not need to be stated in writing, simply that the assessment is in conflict with their religious beliefs. And while we encourage all LEAs in schools to seek 100% participation in the assessments, be reminded of parents and guardians' rights under Chapter 4. Then there's another set of parental and student requests that don't fall under Chapter 4, and those are enumerated on this slide. So they include parental refusals either with no reason given or a reason that's philosophical or moral. Remember that Chapter 4 only allows for religious objections to an assessment. Then the other bullet has to do with a student refusal not initiated by the parent, or whether or not it's initiated by the parent. So a student that's refusing still counts as a refusal. And then these last two bullets have to do with extended absences without makeups. And, if a student stays home because of testing, or a parent holds a student home because of testing, those would still be counted as refusals against participation rate. This next category then takes us into students with no attempt and no exclusion marked. And this is an area that a significant number of schools have students that are marked as such and therefore count against participation rate. And in essence, whenever a student either leaves an entire test blank, an entire section blank, or answers fewer than 5 questions in any section, those are not scored and are considered a no attempt, no exclusion marked. So it's really critical that proctors and test administrators ensure that there's active proctoring, again within our guidelines and as appropriate, but that proctors are moving around classrooms and ensuring that students are completing, not only completing at least 5 questions in any section, but really ensuring that students are completing the entire tests. Here on this slide, we've just lifted out a few of the do's and don'ts. Obviously, your test administrators and assessment coordinators are very familiar with these, and again, underscoring the importance of active proctoring, as well as encouraging the class to check their answers as they move through the assessments. Doing all of this in line with guidance, and certainly not in a way that would violate test security and test integrity. But the active proctoring is really key to ensuring that students are completing their assessments. And then there's the issue of students with no record. And this is probably the area over which your teams have the most control, the most direct control. And this is an area that significantly impacts the participation rate of many of your schools. So students with no record are reported as enrolled and full academic year in PIMS, but for whatever reason don't have a return test booklet assigned to them. And these are data errors made by LEAs and schools, and can be cases where schools simply fail to return completed booklets or return an incomplete booklet for a student that didn't test. Here's a list of the types of data errors that we find as they relate, and here are the some of the actions that can be taken to improve this. Making sure that you submit accurate data in PIMS on time, using PIMS reports to check that data. Also, really key, checking the SIS vendor's handbook and manual for any changes. There have been scenarios where one of our many SIS vendors has made a change in their system. No one at the district realized that, and you end up with students that are being inappropriately reported, and in this case can start to become counted as non-proficient students. We recommend that you establish a team for data submissions, and that there's more than one set of eyes reviewing the accuracy and integrity of the data, and that you attend webinars that our divisions and PDE are holding throughout the spring, as well as our assessment updates, and really making sure that these attribution windows that we open up in the spring and summer are really used to be sure that every student is matched to their records and every student is enrolled in your schools. We can't underscore this enough. And we recognize that in many of your schools and districts, particularly those of you that are in, very small districts, we know some of our districts are even, less than 1,000 or less than 500 students, you might not have a full-time PIMS administrator, and you might not have, full-time data folks on your teams. But however you get this done, whichever personnel you're assigning, you've got to make sure that these are your detail-oriented, type A personality folks that are going to comb through student by student, record by record, and give you as superintendents and charter directors, give you full confidence that you're signing off on a data set that's 100% accurate. And we're having a separate webinar very soon specifically on minimizing this issue of students with no record. And we encourage you to think now about which individuals on your team, manage your records and can prepare them to in advance of that webinar. So next steps, we have a number of webinars, sessions, and presentations in the weeks and months ahead. We've got 2 PDE webinars on accountability reporting for both PSSAs and Keystones. DRC is holding webinars on attribution maps and test administrator trainings that are very valuable. PDE is partnering with Patton on some sessions around also on test administrator training. We have 2 presentations at our data summit in just a few weeks here. So if you have individuals on your teams that are going to the data summit, we encourage them to be a part of those presentations. And then, as always, we have our manuals for test administrators and assessment coordinators that are your reference to be sure that every T is crossed and I is dotted as it relates to the veracity and accuracy of your data in the system. So, we understand the federal law and at PDE are committed to working alongside of you to provide the best communication and support possible to position each of your schools for 95% or higher participation. And we look forward to working with you and partnering in that effort. So with that being said, we encourage staying in touch with us. We thank you for your time today. Thank you for your leadership and your commitment at the local level. And we wish you a good remainder of the week and a strong second half of the school year. Thank you.